All right, here we go. All right, hey, thanks for coming to our talk. This is AEM in China. I am Tad Reeves, architect at Arbory Digital. I'm from Lookout Mountain, Georgia in the USA. And I had a great time running the pre-adaptTo bike ride. I really hope that that becomes a tradition in the future.
I'm Kamil, Chociej, principal engineer at StreamX in Białystok, Poland.
Great, and so today we're going to talk web performance in China, because this is a difficult nut to crack from both a technical perspective as well as a business perspective. We're going to be talking about why you should absolutely be investing time into China web performance, the primary problems that need solving, and an approach that we found works for edge delivery web performance inside of China. So first of all, why should you care? So China has more than 1.2 billion, with a B, internet users, which that's more than India and the US and Brazil combined. A lot of those are mobile. These are affluent users that definitely have access to the products that you want to buy. Now, it's acknowledged that a lot of sites are just domestic, and you'd never be expected to see much traffic from China. However, if your site has global reach and it isn't seeing significant Chinese traffic, that actually means that something is really wrong. And it certainly isn't just translations. And I'd be interested in experience with other people here, but for sites that I've managed, just translating a site to simplified Chinese only moves the needle a little bit. It only gets you a couple percentage points of traffic increase. It's not the actual problem. So a few words on what makes China challenging. And there's two primary factors that could be discussed in this. One of them is the Great Firewall, which we're going to discuss in some detail here. And the other one is internet content provider licensing, or ICP licensing, which that's restrictions by the Chinese government, which I'm only going to touch on really briefly because that's not the focus of the talk. And so yeah, licensing is a factor. It's needed, so you need a license to locally host any gear inside of China. And so that's a whole process. You don't necessarily have to have a business entity in China, but it's a mega process to be able to get through. You also need local phone numbers to go and index things in their local search engines like Baidu. You need ICP licensing for even uploading video. So yes, that's an entire separate issue, but that's not what we're going to talk about right now. So Great Firewall of China. So everybody knows that it exists. I'm going to give you a little bit more details. So this is a super sophisticated, always changing filter for all traffic ingress into China. They use tons of different techniques for this. They use DNS poisoning, IP blocking, VPN probing, all kinds of stuff to look for circumvention tooling, to look for VPNs without decrypting data. They'll throttle traffic, they'll do TCP resets, they'll forge packet requests, they'll do all kinds of things to either delay or alter traffic that's coming in and out of China. And it's super difficult, in fact, nearly impossible to predict how it's going to respond. It's going to change day to day. Even depending on what building you're at, it will change. I've experienced this myself. Like I was in a hotel in Guangzhou, and it was a nice hotel. It was frequented by Western guests. And I could get to everything. I could get to YouTube, I could get to my Gmail, I could get to all kinds of stuff that was really expensive, so I moved to one across the street. It was still nice, but it was frequented mostly by Chinese guests, and I couldn't get to anything. Even my corporate VPN was unreliable. So just moving can change things, which brings up the fact that if you are relying on something like web page test, and you're just going to occasionally check from web page test, web page test has their gear in data centers, so you're not necessarily going to get the same experience. You're not guaranteed to have parity with what an average Chinese person is going to see. It's not just client-facing things that's having problems. Let's say you have a backend system that's relying on a bunch of GitOps to be able to do its work. GitHub itself is either fully or partially blocked in China a significant percentage of the time. So you're going to have all kinds of issues with just deploying and reliably getting content over there, unless you're monitoring it. The other problem, your analytics are probably way off. So if you're like, oh, I only get 2% of my traffic from China. Well, the problem is that you might be losing anywhere from 1 out of 2 to tons of your GTM traffic. Additionally, your Adobe Analytics traffic is unless you do specific actions to make sure that your DTM tags fire in China, you're probably not going to be getting any analytics in China. So that datum of I don't get traffic in China may be entirely wrong. Additionally, if you're trying to measure like RUM metrics in China, so all the big providers like your Datadog and your New Relic and your Dynatrace and so forth, they all don't work in China. They all say that they don't work in China. So it's a little bit tough to say, good, well, what is actually my performance? So additionally, so global CDNs aren't in China. Fastly, Cloudflare, CloudFront, Azure Front Door, Akamai, they all don't have local points of presence in China. Akamai exited the Chinese market last year. Closest you can get is near China. And then also, just so you know too, so everybody knows that, or most people know that Hong Kong is politically a part of China. Hong Kong, from a network perspective, is not part of China. So if you have stuff hosted in Hong Kong, you're not in China. Okay, AEM-specific challenges. So AEM as a cloud service, as most of you know, is not offered in China at all. The closest you can get is, I think, Singapore, or maybe Tokyo. AEM Managed Services does have a China offering, but it's actually not AMS. It is a completely separate service. It's hosted in completely separate hosting. It's got different CI/CD, different licensing. So if you're going to end up using that service, you're essentially doing a completely separate site with a completely separate code base, completely separate expenses. It's basically just you're setting up another whole company just to be able to host in China. So that is an option, but it's an expensive option. So cloud service, so why wouldn't you put it? I mean, you could probably talk everybody's ear off about this, but this is an almost prohibitively complex task to put AEM Cloud Service in China. With all the Fastly and Azure and Mongo and all the other servers and so forth, reconstructing that and reconstituting that entire stack in China would be really rough. Edge Delivery, additionally, as most of you know, it's composited from services based in Cloudflare and Fastly. They're not in China. So what about our own site? So if you got a site let's say you got a site that's based on Edge Delivery, like how bad could it be? So we did a survey on a bunch of folks on their web performance, a bunch of AEM architects and such, and I think some of you were even surveyed, about what the state of their performance. And this graph I found really interesting. 89.3% of folks are not measuring their China performance. They have no idea. In fact, a statistically significant percentage said we'd prefer not to know. I don't think I answered that, but maybe I did. Okay, good. So in order to get some data, so like how would you get some data? So I did a bunch of research on this. I found a tool that works actually pretty well. So Ollie Cloud has a RUM solution that's hosted in China that you can go and deploy onto things. So it's called ARMS. It's relatively low cost, and so you can go and stick that like on an Edge Delivery site. I stuck the URL on this if you want it later. So we deployed ARMS on one of our Edge Delivery sites, and we just went and found a whole bunch of people in China, Adobe employees and so forth, and said, hey, from your homes, go and try to access our Edge Delivery site and see what you get. And if you look at there's a red spike right there, right in the middle. So that's where it went from 0.5 seconds to an average of 1.8 minutes to get a fully loaded page. That is actually how bad the performance is. So from the US, our site is getting like an average LCP of like a second and a half, something like that. From China, it's around, and it's highly variable, but during peak business time, which is like when everybody's looking at things, during the business day is like anywhere between 1 minute and 2 minutes to load the page. And that's when it loads. Most of the time it's broken. All right, good. So what are you going to do? What are your options? So you could say, okay, good. Well, let's just go and provision some stuff in China, the 6.5 way. And we've done that, but it's expensive. And it doesn't work for everything. And if you've got cloud service, then that's not an option. You could use a static site generator, just go and take a picture of everything that you've got and stick it in China. You could just go and remove features that don't work, because we saw this when we were doing a bunch of market research saying, what do people do? They say, okay, well, our recommended products thing is never going to work because it uses services that we need that are only hosted in the US, so we're just going to remove stuff and just hamstring our entire site. Maybe that's an option. You could try to do an in-China CDN, that has its own problems that I'm going to talk about in a second. Or you could integrate your own solution. So the China CDN problem. So you might just say, well, why don't we just use a China CDN? Well, we just find a China CDN and we'll just use that and serve it. The problem is that all of your edge nodes inside of China have the same problem that clients have. They're going to have unreliable backend egress out into the US or out to the global network. So, and you never know when they're having backend fetch problems. So you're going to have a well-performing, partially broken site all the time. which I don't know that that's entirely acceptable. But then all your other things, navigation, search, any dynamic features that require things that are back in the rest of the global network, that's not going to work. So you might as well say well, let's just take a picture of it and just make an SSG. So when doing all this, we got a couple of guiding principles that we kind of came to. So number one, whether it's front end or back end, any data traversal over the Great Firewall is going to be unreliable no matter what you do. So that's just the first principle. You don't just always know it's going to be unreliable, and you got to design around that fact. And then in China, clients ideally should never have to access data from outside the firewall. Ideally. There's going to be some cases where we have to go around and say, good, we're going to fetch this, but for the most part, that's the other principle. So the solution that we ended up coming to was to essentially take the cache model and just basically turn it upside down. So to basically make a flexible solution to push content and code directly to a lightweight system that we host inside China. And this system is flexible to work with Edge Delivery and Cloud Service, N65, Magento, and some other services as well. And this solution that we're going to demo is it runs on EDS. It's got some clusters located outside of China to go and fetch things and run GitOps and stuff like that. And it's got some clusters located inside China for direct client access. And to talk about it, turn this over to Kamil.
Yeah, that mentioned that in China, clients should never have to access data from outside the Great Firewall, and that simply translating your website to Chinese won't probably increase that much the traffic from China on your website. Let me quickly show you what could be the reason. So, this is my remote desktop connected to the computer in China mainland. And here I have some tabs opened. The first one is the original content source, which is Edge Delivery Services. And you can see my last test results here. It took like 40 seconds to load the LCP, right? Let's refresh it. And
40 seconds is not bad for this also.
Yeah. It will take, again, a few seconds to load. So this is the Helix.
This is a great web experience.
Do you already feel why it's not enough to translate the page? It is fully translated, but when someone is trying to open it in China, it doesn't work at all. And let's keep waiting. Yeah, sometimes it takes like 2 minutes, so I won't wait anymore. The next step is the Edge cluster from our solution, which is located in USA. As you can see, it's also not that good. And let's refresh it and wait a few seconds. Oh, this time it was pretty fast. And the last tab is our solution Edge cluster located in China. And that's it. Less than 1 second.
I'm not good at math, but I think that's faster.
I can even show you the results from the yesterday. So the first one is the AEM Live, AEM Live, AEM Live, AEM Live. Here is the US, 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 and the China. So which of those numbers would you like to see on your website hosted for Chinese visitors? Yeah. So let me quickly, not quickly, but let me show you how we achieved this. So our solution is based on globally distributed Kubernetes clusters mesh. We have a pilot cluster located in EU, processing cluster located in EU, and a bunch of edge clusters, one in USA, one in China, and one in EU. We have just seen 3 types of clusters, and we can split them in 2 groups. One is a control plane, and the second one is a data plane. Pilot cluster is responsible for project definition and services deployment. The processing cluster is responsible for receiving the data from content sources and process those data in a way that data is ready to be delivered for the end users. And edge clusters are deployed near to the users, to the end users, and are ready to deploy the content which was pushed from the processing layer. So when we have this cluster mesh, then we have to deploy some services to that infrastructure to deliver the content, right? To process and deliver the content. So there is a role of platform operator who has to prepare and define the service mesh, which contains 3 layers: sources, processing, and delivery. And for example, this is the mesh that we have prepared for today's presentation. On the left, we have sources. On the middle, it's processing, and delivery on the right. The whole communication in services mesh is done through the messaging system channels. Those are the gray boxes here and here between the services, which are the white boxes, right? So sources definition maps the content source systems with the inboxes channels. Then we have processing layer, which defines how data is flowing from the inboxes channels through the processing services and the relay channels to the outboxes channels. And the delivery layer defines which channels are used to fetch the data for the delivery services. So when such a service mesh is deployed to the pilot cluster, then the pilot cluster is responsible to deploy the selected layers to the processing and edge clusters. The source definition goes to the processing to handle the ingestion of the data from the content sources, and together with the processing services, and all delivery services are going to the edge clusters. So when that is set up, our platform is ready to receive content and serve it close to the user. How do we get the content to the platform? In our case, the only content source is Edge Delivery Services, but the platform is source agnostic. It can receive data from any source that is able to send a post request with the data to ingestion API located in the processing cluster. And the reason why our processing cluster is deployed on EU instead of China is that because our content source is in Western countries, so the connection between those has to be reliable. In our case, we are using GitHub connector in a form of GitHub Actions. Actually, we have 2 of them to ingest the data from Edge Delivery Services to processing layer. But we have more ready to plug and play connectors. For example, for AEM 6.5, AEM as a Cloud Service, Edge Delivery Services, and Adobe Commerce, and more. So how the data flows in our solution. So when content author publish the page on, for example, in our case, it is document authoring, GitHub action is triggered on the Edge Delivery repository, and that GitHub action fetched the content from Helix endpoint, and it simply ingested to the processing cluster. There is another GitHub action which is listening for changes of static files like JavaScripts and CSS files on the Edge Delivery Services repository, and where such a change occurs, it simply takes this file and ingests it to the processing cluster. Then the data is processed on that cluster, and it's pushed to the edge clusters. And what does it mean that the data is processed? In our case, we want to avoid all the traffic going from in-China users to the external sources through the Great Firewall. That means when the page is published and it references some images, for example, or it references index file, we have to be sure that those files are also delivered from our edge cluster, not from any source in EU, for example, or USA, because it won't work. So when the data is processed and pushed to the edge clusters, it is ready to be fetched by the external users. In this diagram, we have, for example, 3 users, one in USA, one in China, one in EU. And each of them is fetching the content from the nearest edge cluster. We have a chance to see what happens when in China user tries to fetch content from US, right? It didn't work well. So in our solution, when we have this edge cluster deployed there, we have moved the firewall from the right to the left, so it doesn't affect the performance on the user experience when he's loading the page on his browser, but it doesn't mean that the Great Firewall disappeared, right? It is still there, and right now it is filtering our data flow between processing cluster and edge cluster. What does it mean? We are using a communication protocol that is less likely to be interrupted by the Great Firewall, but it can happen sometimes. But we are sure that the messaging system is keep pushing data from processing to edge until it is delivered to the edge. So that means that the end user won't see any impact from the Great Firewall on the website performance anymore, but the content updates can be delayed on Chinese edge. So now let me show you the live demo of updating a content. Okay, so this is the page hosted in China that we are going to update. This is the document authoring UI. I will add here in the title, go to China. I have to preview the page and, oh, nice. I have to preview the page to ensure that the change is there, and it sometimes happens, I don't know why, but the change is not there. Oh, okay, because it reverted my change. Go to China. Preview. There we go. Now let's publish it. Yeah, the page is published. Now let's move to the Edge Delivery Services GitHub repository. Here is our GitHub action, which was triggered by AEM Code Sync bot. And this GitHub action takes like 20 seconds. And what it is doing, it is simply fetching the HTML from Helix, and it is ingesting it to the processing cluster. So when it is done, yeah. So we were looking at this flow, the DA, GitHub workflow, processing cluster, data is processed here and pushed to the edge cluster. And now I will refresh, and here we go, the content is updated. So, yeah, this integration that we have seen during this presentation is pretty simple, but we also have connectors ready and operational for AEM as a cloud service, AEM 6.5, and Adobe Commerce, Magento. And we have a demo which integrates multiple of those content sources. If you wish to see it in action, you are more than welcome on our Meet the Expert table. And yeah, see you there. That.
Good. Well, I guess to sum up, there's as everybody knows, there's going to be trade-offs in every architecture. This isn't perfect, but it definitely solves for a lot of the client issues in this case. China web performance is definitely important, but I guess the main takeaway is that, and this is something that I've come across a bunch of times in dealing with other customers, that they feel like there's nothing that they can effectively do about this. There is something that can be done about this China web performance, and it actually can be solved. And thanks for listening.
Great to finally see a solution. But, there are questions now. Let's start with image serving. How is image serving done when using Edge Delivery Services with image modifier parameters?
Take the transform one.
We simply take the transformed image already, and we just grab it from the source system, ingest it to the processing, and push it to the edge cluster as it is.
There's multiple transform parameters that are on the end of it. Each one of those is being stored and being pushed individually to China because we don't have access to the
all the options.
That's right, because you don't have access to the Fastly image transform service in China.
All renditions are just get fetched from the source system and pushed to the edge.
That's great. Now about the commerce integration, for example, Adobe Commerce Magento, you mentioned it. How do you ensure that the communication back to the central database is not interrupted? Presumably there's like central stock database, out of stock information, stuff like that, orders and so on.
We have a solution for this in mind, but we didn't work on it yet. This is probably in the future we'll provide a solution for that.
All right, looking forward to that. Dynamic media. Can we use dynamic media in China?
This solution doesn't necessarily take into account dynamic media. So I could envision a way to be able to do this, but this doesn't necessarily take that into account.
All right. Final question. We talk about integrating of backend system, for example, form submission. How to get this reliable?
Take forms?
It's exactly the same as previous question. There is a way to do that, but it will take some delay. We can queue all those requests and be sure that they will be pushed out of there.
So you queue bulk and...
Yeah, that's right. And I think that the key thing is to make sure that that queuing is under your own control, because if you offload that to the CDN, you have no idea when or if you're ever going to be consistent.
All right. It was a pleasure to have you on stage.
All right, good.
Big applause.
Thank you.